Moving on to a story that you wanted to cover, San Francisco is debating reparations of $5 million for each black resident, with a lot of caveats and requirements that you'd have to meet to get that. I don't think it's anywhere near being accomplished, but it's pretty far along the process, it seems.
Yeah, they're debating it right now. This is from the Washington Post. Yeah, they're trying to figure out how much San Francisco, where, by the way, slavery was never actually legal, should pay black residents for decades of discrimination. So there's a panel that was appointed by the government. They're trying to come up with, they're not looking at like a mathematical formula, as the Washington Post puts it, but they're just trying to come up with something that makes sense. 15 members of that panel, they've been doing this for about a year and a half. Here's an example from the Post also, going back to the 60s in San Francisco. They say city leaders demolished part of the Fillmore district, a neighborhood once known as the Harlem of the West, displacing 883 businesses and 20,000 people, most of them black. Decades later, thousands of people remain displaced, and the neighborhood has turned into a predominantly white enclave of multi-million-dollar homes. That much is definitely true.
Which doesn't that point at the actual solution? The homes are there. Let the people who are run out of the neighborhood move into those homes.
Right, redistribute the homes.
There we go.
To see how Nancy Pelosi feels about that.
Well, she's got other homes.
That's true. This is more from the Post, reparations program is not a recompense for slavery, which was never legal in San Francisco, but instead the committee's report says, this is what we were just talking about, quote, for the public policies explicitly created to subjugate black people in San Francisco by upholding and expanding the intent and legacy of chattel slavery. They say that black residents in the city of San Francisco have a median income of about $44,000. That compares with $85,000 for Latinos, $105,000 for Asians, and $113,000 for white residents, according to 2021 census data. So lest you think that this is sort of a redistribution from other minorities to black residents, the argument here is they actually have a median income that is much lower than other minorities in the city of San Francisco. So there's some justification to be found there. I think this is an incredibly difficult question because it's not a federal program of reparations for slavery. It's then expanding the definition of what constitutes reparation-worthy policies. There's no doubt, there's no question that there's a history in just about every major American city of policies that were not explicitly racist, but were intentionally racist. And I think there's a really obvious question of how we deal with that when it's still having effects that, to borrow a phrase, trickle down into the community. But it's the precedent that San Francisco can set here is pretty big. And
speaking of trickle down, the problem that a lot of reparations advocates have with this type of approach is that they will say, and I agree with them, that if you don't fix the systemic abuses and the systemic racism that are producing the need to do this and to talk about this, then it's pointless. What it is basically filling a bucket with a hole still on the bottom of it.
It's like AI. What you feed into it, you get out of it.
Right, and so you would give out $5 million, but if you didn't kind of reorient your system into a social democracy in which everyone has opportunity, then you're 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to be back in the same place. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways, I think talking about reparations gets elite support because it doesn't kind of touch the more kind of fundamental structures, and also they're pretty sure that it's not going to happen. And I think this article is important, and this debate in San Francisco is important to understand in the context of this next story. If we could put up C2, which is from NBC News, where they say diversity roles disappear 3 years after George Floyd's murder inspired them. And the article begins, diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders who were hired in waves to help companies achieve an ethnically balanced workforce after George Floyd's murder in 2020 are being phased out, surveys indicate, leaving experts in the field concerned that corporations' talk of affecting change was empty words. They also point out an extraordinary irony that of the remaining DEI executives, many of them are white, because those were the folks that got in there first. Yep. Because we do have the problems that people are pointing out, like, why on earth would you have so many white diversity executives if we didn't have a structural, fundamental problem with racism and diversity in this country? Like, there's no better example of it than that. And so as a result, it's the first in, first out first in, last out situation, last in, first out. Like, if you're the last diversity officer in, as soon as times get tough and nobody's watching you as closely anymore, and you've sort of suppressed a lot of your Slack uprisings, and you're not as concerned about the staff revolts anymore, you have more freedom to maneuver. Then you're like, you know what, this line item, getting rid of this. And so now they're laying off a bunch of diversity officers without necessarily, solving the problem that they were brought in to solve.
Right, and it's kind of going to be interesting to see what this is a good experiment in what those diversity officers were bringing to the table in the first place, because if they go, I'm really curious as to how that plays out. Is there any noticeable difference in workplace culture for the better or the worse? We're about to find that out in a fairly big way, and one of the problems, I think, in general with this conversation, and that's one thing that the San Francisco policy discussion is testing, is how we define what is the sort of consensus definition of racism. And obviously, that has been a problem throughout American history. There were plenty of people who were just open, overt racists. There were other people that acted like open, overt racists that did not see themselves as racists. Now, so that's not to say this is a new thing that's just suddenly happening, but in the last 2 decades or so, what we've kind of come to understand as obviously racial discrimination, as obviously acting on this belief that people are inferior based on the color of their skin, and to quote Martin Luther King, not the content of their character, then you get into a situation where we're asking whether certain policies, some of these in San Francisco, for instance, the ones that the Washington Post cited, obviously had racist consequences, and no question about it. If you set a precedent that reparations are in order for policies that were not explicitly racist but had racist consequences, man, is that going to open up the door and open up the floodgates to a really big conversation about where public money is going. I just think that's, especially we're going to talk later in the show about Angela Davis, who discovered she was related distantly to people who came over on the Mayflower. I think that kind of makes our ability to deal with some difficult realities very hard.
And this reminds me of a recent article in The Intercept by Alice Sperry that uncovered that a top diversity executive, if you saw this, at this Quaker organization was actually white and was claiming to be, I think, a combination of Arab and Latina.
It's an amazing story.
Which apparently shouldn't have to do, though, because according to this NBC News stat, it says another survey showed that black employees represent only 3.8% of chief diversity officers overall, while white people making up 76% of the roles. Those of Hispanic or Latino ethnicity make up 7.8%, and those of Asian ethnicity make up 7.7%. So so 3/4 of the diversity executives in this country are white.
Yeah.
Which let's just sit with that for a moment. And they're now firing their deputy, their black and brown deputies.
Yeah, of course they are.
Yeah.
And there's no surprise to that. But it is a good reminder to your point about how even reparations, let alone DEI, can be used as a cop-out or a smokescreen. That's what a lot of this is. And a lot of these conversations are the most divisive and politically charged among everything that we talk about. They're the ones that have people at each other's throats. They're the ones that tear people apart and definitely don't bring them together. And they're the ones that ultimately are basically like the little shiny things that powerful people want to dangle in front of the conversation rather than making structural changes or making real concessions in that, because it's just easier for them and they don't suffer the consequences necessarily.
Right. And to me, the only real answer is a coalition of white, black, and brown working class people who overthrow those white diversity officers and recreate a social democracy based on their shared interests.
Seize the means of diversity production.
So, there you go. There you go.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.